Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, kind of wherever you guys or everyone is joining us from today. I want to welcome you to the Quantum Journey, which is a fireside conversation hosted jointly by ourselves, ExeQuantum, and Grant Thornton UAE on the UAE's path to post-quantum readiness. My name is Audrey Nicoll. I'm Chief Growth Officer here at ExeQuantum, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating our conversation today. Over the next 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to do something that's a little atypical to your kind of traditional webinar. We're going to start from the beginning, kind of what quantum computing actually is, why it matters for the systems that you and I rely on every day, and our businesses, our clients, and then kind of get into what organizations here in the UAE should be doing about it. Joining me are three people who, between them, cover the entire picture. We have the advisory lens, the technology lens, and the research lens. I will let them introduce themselves properly in a moment, but first I want to hand over to Anand Balasubramanian from Grant Thornton UAE, because this conversation genuinely starts with Grant Thornton's relationship with this market, with this audience. Anand, over to you.
Thank you, Audrey, and a very good morning to everyone who's joined. It's great to have all of you on this fireside chat. Delighted to co-host this chat on quantum computing and the path to post-quantum readiness. My name is Anand, and I lead the risk and compliance practice at Grant Thornton, the UAE. And my focus is helping institutions navigate emerging risks, regulatory changes, and of course, quantum computing is definitely one of them. I am joined by two very distinguished co-panelists who are experts, and they are at the forefront of quantum innovation, who I'd like to introduce. Let me start with Sam Tseitkin, who is the founder and CEO of ExeQuantum. Sam, I think, is joining us from Australia, and he brings very deep industry insights into the practical aspects of migration to post-quantum cryptography. As already mentioned, Grant Thornton UAE is partnering with ExeQuantum in bringing post-quantum cryptography solutions to the market over here. And ExeQuantum is ISO 27001 certified post-quantum cryptographic company, and they have a platform, EQ Core, which is very valuable for cryptographic discovery, formally verifying quantum resistant implementation and monitoring. So, Sam, thanks a lot for joining us on this fireside chat. My next co-panelist is a physicist, Dr. James Grieve. Dr. James is based in the UAE in Abu Dhabi, and Dr. James' work is actually shaping the region's research and strategic direction in this field. Dr. James is Executive Director of Quantum Communications at Technology Innovation Institute based in Abu Dhabi, and he leads a multidisciplinary team in developing next generation quantum secure communication technology. So again, I think for those of you who are wondering, what are we doing in the region? Here we have Dr. James, right, working on it right close to home. Dr. James also is a recognized authority on the topic of preparing global quantum communication infrastructure. And so, Dr. James, very, very glad to have you here, and thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. As Audrey said, right, this discussion is going to focus on what quantum computing is all about, the implications, and the journey towards post-quantum cryptography. So Audrey, over to you.
Thanks, Anand. Thanks so much. And I moderate a lot of panels and fireside chats and webinars, and it's rare that we've got this depth covering a topic, especially one like quantum computing and quantum technology. So this, I think, will be an exciting next half hour to 45 minutes. So Anand, I'd like to start with you. Let's start where you were just talking, kind of bringing everyone onto the same page. If you can take us through it, what is quantum computing, and how is it actually different from the computers that we use today?
Thank you, Audrey. Look, honestly, one of the few panels where probably I am the most ignorant among all the participants, right? Okay, compared to Dr. James and Sam. So my perspective, and probably also might be valuable for the audience who is joining us, is to understand what is quantum computing all about, right? And what are we talking about here? So I'm going to take a very layman's perspective, and I want to start with a very simple but a very powerful and important idea that quantum computers are not just faster versions of the classical computers that you're using right now, right? Okay, it's a fundamentally different way of processing information. So I just want to highlight that with a very quick example, right? So classical computers for most of us, right, who've studied this in our college or high schools, use what are called as bits, right? It could be either a zero or a one. Now, quantum computers use what are called as qubits or quantum bits, right? Okay, and the you can call it weird, you can call it amazing feature about them is they can behave as a zero or a one or a mix of both, right? And this distinction, a mix of both, is really at the heart of what quantum computing is all about. Now, to make it a bit more graphic, the way I would look at it is imagine a classical switch, right? Okay, a switch typically has two modes. You can turn it off, which is probably a zero, or you can turn it on, which is probably a one, right? Okay. Now, a quantum computer or a qubit is like a dimmer switch, right? Which means it can be on, it can be off, and it can be anything in between, right? Okay, So, another example could be a coin. When you flip a coin and it lands, it could be a head or a tail, but where the coin is actually in the air, it could be a mix of the two, right? So the point which I want to bring about here is that the qubits, right, are very different from way you look at classical bits. Now the question is that how are they actually different in terms of how they solve problems? And probably the best way of looking at this is think of a very, very complex maze, right? Okay. Now, classical computer, and when I say classical computer, I'm talking about even the supercomputers, right? Now, they are going to be exploring this maze, going through one path and then the other, and so on and so forth, maybe very fast, right? Okay, but ultimately, they are trying different paths one after the other. Quantum computing is different in the sense that imagine that you have the magic powers to soar over the maze, right? Okay, so that you can look at all the paths at the same time, right? Okay, and that is where quantum computing is different. So the point I'm trying to make is that quantum computers don't necessarily use more brute force. They are not trying to explore the maze faster. They are just looking at the whole maze from a very different perspective, using the laws and principles of quantum physics. So it's not just working harder, right, or working faster. It's a fundamentally different way of looking at information, right? By the way, this is not magic, right? It sounds like magic, but it's not magic, right? Okay, and we have Dr. James, who's a quantum physicist on the call. It essentially is a fundamentally different way of looking at information and harnessing the laws of quantum physics, right? And that's what makes them so powerful at solving specific kinds of problems, which I'll come to later. Now, I just want to give a bit of history to give you a bit of perspective in terms of this whole topic and how it emerged and and why has it become so important now. This is a bit of trivia, right? Okay, it's an interesting quiz trivia, right? And this picture, which I'm putting on the screen, is being dubbed the most intelligent picture ever taken. So this is from I think 1927, and it has 29 of the founders of quantum physics, and out of the 29, 17 went on to or either had or went on to win a Nobel Prize. And you can see Mr. Einstein in the front, and the lady Marie Curie actually won 2 Nobel Prizes. So these are the brilliant minds who gave us quantum physics, right? But then it stayed as physics, right? It stayed as a research topic. The whole concept of trying to make it practical and getting into quantum computing started in the 1980s, right? There were discussions in terms of how do we use this, right, into more practical perspective. two very notable events happened, right? There were several, but I think pertinent to today's topic are two events. 1984, the height of Cold War, when the Soviets were eavesdropping on what the West was saying, and vice versa, right? So the whole aspect of how do we make communication more secure? How do we detect eavesdroppers? Came about. 1984, two Bs, Charles Bennett and Giles Brassard, they devised a mechanism using the laws of quantum physics to actually secure communication, to make sure that it is impossible for anyone to eavesdrop on a conversation. Okay, and this was the beginning of the whole concept of secure quantum communication. And Dr. James will talk more about that. Right, that was the first thing. 1994 was a keynote event, and people call it the doomsday of cryptography, and that is when Peter Shor, the mathematician, published what is called as the Shor's algorithm. And what this algorithm essentially said was that you could use quantum computers to solve some very difficult mathematical problems on which the whole of cryptography is based, right? So just to give a quick brief on this, the whole subject of cryptography, on which all of us very smugly believe in, that our data is secure, our communication is secure, it's all based on the assumption that the classical computers can't solve some very difficult mathematical problems. And one of that is a problem called integer factorization, which Sam will talk about. So we were all very happy till 1994 that these are very tough problems, can't be solved by classical computers. It'll take billions of years to solve these problems. Lo and behold, 1994, Shor proved that by using quantum computers, what a classical computer will take a billion years can probably be done in days, right? Okay. People were still smug, and they said that, yeah, but then no, it's a mathematician, and really, where is it really going to be practical, right? Look at this. Last 10 years, the hardware has been developing exponentially, right? And what was in the realm of theory is actually getting practical. 2016, IBM puts a 5-qubit system on the cloud, making quantum hardware accessible. 2024, NIST says that, guys, this is no longer a theoretical threat, right? And they published their first post-quantum standards, okay? And 2025, IBM publishes this roadmap for quantum computing and says that by 2029, we might be having the first fault tolerant, as they call it, quantum computer, right? The point I'm trying to make is that, very simply put, what was a lot of brilliant mathematics and theory, with the advent of more efficient algorithms, with the advent of the hardware to support it, is no longer a theory, right? Okay, and it's happening. It might not be happening today, but it's going to happen. And I guess the bottom line, the way I, as a layman, look at it, is that this is something which is there on the cards, right? It is not something that is going to go back. The development of hardware, the algorithms, is just going to get better and faster and faster. Now, the question that's asked is that, can quantum computers do everything? Are they going to replace classical computers? The answer is no, right? Okay. I don't think we are ever going to be using quantum computers to do Excel spreadsheets. I might be wrong, but that's my assumption right now, right? Okay, so they can't efficiently do everything, right? But they are very, very good at doing certain things, right? Okay. Unfortunately, for many, maybe fortunately for a few, one of the things that they can do very well is to break the whole edifice, the mathematical edifice on which current cryptography is based, right? Okay. And that is scary, because if this actually becomes more practical, if this, the hardware becomes more accessible, nothing of what we think is secure today, your emails, your data, right, is going to be secure anymore, right? So And that's what we're going to focus on. So what we're going to focus on today's session, before I hand it over to Sam and Dr. James, is what does this mean for modern cryptography, for secure quantum communication, right? Recognizing the risk and how to prepare for that. So with that, Audrey, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Like, that's a great foundation. And I think with Bennett and Brassard, I love that 1994 quantum computing as a practical concept back then. You know, I think for me and probably a lot of the business executives that I speak to, it's really become only a practical concept for us in the last several or few years, and for many as we move forward now. So thank you for kind of that foundation. And Sam, now over to you. And this is probably where it gets a little uncomfortable for anyone who trusts encryption to keep their data safe. Walk us through this risk quantum computing actually kind of poses to our cryptography.
Yep, thank you, Audrey. And honestly, it's going to be hard to top Anand's brilliant explanation earlier. So I will probably go a bit more into the technical part of it somewhat, while keeping it relatively, approachable. Essentially, as Anand said, cryptography, what keeps our digital technology safe, is essentially mathematics. Without cryptography, we don't really have a digital society, because any sort of communications from the, including financials, including medical, including your WhatsApp messages, can not only be listened to, but also tampered with and changed. So essentially, you don't necessarily know whether the invoice you got, is actually the right invoice, like with the right details, or has been changed by someone else. Or, if you send your credit card information, someone else might have read it and stole all the money before you even got to pay the actual, what you tried to pay for. All of that is utilizing math that is essentially, it's easy to solve, it's easy to get the answer from, but how to get the question from, which I'll explain like this, okay? Essentially, in order to break cryptography, you need to answer this question: what x times y equals 15 in this case? If you can solve, this is how RSA works. It's not on of course, a simplified version, not elliptic curve, but because I think RSA is a bit easier to explain, so I'll stick with this version. The question is, can you solve this? If you solve this equation, then you solve this is a specific RSA key. This case, pretty straightforward, right? 3 times 5 equals 15. So what happened is, cryptography utilizes what's called at least the cryptography that's under the quantum threat is utilizing what's called a public key and a private key. It's easy to get if you have access to the private key, it's easy to get the public key. However, if, for example, we take a big number, say this number, this big number would be the public key. Those two question marks would be the private key. Now, if you had both private keys, it would be easy to get the public key, right? You just multiply them together. That's very easy for a classical computer. However, the challenge is, in order for a hacker, for a malicious actor to break cryptography, they would need to calculate those two numbers from this bigger number. Like, they only have access to this big number, they need to calculate those two smaller ones. This is essentially what a lot of our current cryptography runs on, or like digital signatures, etc. Essentially, they rely on the fact that I can send over to you that big number, and you can use that big number to encrypt your data before you send it, in this case, your key for key exchange. You can encrypt your key using that big number to send to me. I hold those two smaller numbers and can therefore decrypt your key using those smaller numbers. And a malicious actor cannot actually access my private key, therefore. Now, if it makes you feel better, while you cannot actually calculate the smaller numbers, a classical computer does not currently possess the algorithm that can solve those two smaller numbers from this big number as well. So computers solve problems two ways, technically speaking, like you do. It can either brute force it by just guessing all the possible numbers, or it can run an algorithm that essentially does it that essentially solves this problem quicker. Like, for example, if I say, like, if I say, if like, I give you a riddle, you can either try, or I give you a Sudoku, like a Sudoku board. You can either try to guess all the possible possibilities, all the possible combinations, which would take a long time, or you can do some sort of what you're basically doing is algorithms to solve it, like your Sudoku. Now, a classical computer does not possess an algorithm that we know of that can solve these numbers. However, quantum computers contain what's called Shor's algorithm, which is what Anand touched on a little bit. Essentially, quantum computers introduce a whole new set of algorithms that classical computers didn't have and don't have yet, and vice versa. There are a lot of algorithms that classical computers possess that quantum computers cannot perform efficiently. In this case, we kind of got lucky that one of the quantum algorithms that we discovered can actually solve this specific equation, which means that considering this equation is what holds a lot of our data safe, it means that quantum computers might be able to break our encryption. However, however, the problem is now, of course, quantum computers don't exist yet. So you might think to yourself, okay, what's the problem? Well, the thing is, I can actually, a malicious actor can take this big number, store it, and then wait, basically wait with that big number until a quantum computer develops, and then break it later. So that's the harvest-now-decrypt-later problem, and essentially why quantum is currently a threat to our cryptography. And now I'll pass it over back to Audrey.
All right, thanks, Sam. So the risk, we've heard on it. What I'd like to do is bring James into the conversation now. James, if you can kind of give us the other side of the story. So how does quantum actually make communication more secure, not less? I think a lot of people probably haven't really heard this part.
Okay, thank you very much, Audrey, and thank you to my co-panelists for setting the stage so well. So I think I'll start by saying you can kind of zoom out from this problem a little bit, first of all, and see the quantum threat as really in the abstract, it's about humanity's ongoing computational advances. We're always pushing boundaries and trying to come up with better ways to compute, or faster or more innovative ways to compute. And this has always inevitably resulted in disruption to encryption. So the history of cryptography is really the history of a sort of cat and mouse game between advances in compute and advances in algorithms, and then the reaction from cryptography and so on. And so I think, first of all, I think it's very important up front to mention that there is a migration possible here. So there is an ongoing migration that I believe ExeQuantum are involved in, right? Which is this migration to post-quantum algorithms, which are mathematical algorithms that are using problems that are different from the factoring problem, which are believed to be intractable even for quantum computers. So that's a very important migration. It's the logical response to this new threat. And it's absolutely critical, in my opinion, that we accomplish this rollout in a timely fashion. And TII, in our cryptography research center, we also have a lot of activity in this direction as well. But I'm a physicist, so I think it's interesting to look at the upsides of quantum technology. I mean, we're not building quantum computers purely so we can break legacy crypto systems. We're building them because of the fantastic computational advances that will be afforded to almost every facet of our society, from drug development to material science, battery technology, and fertilizer technology, and all of these things. So quantum also gives us a different way to think about security, and I'm happy that Anand already mentioned the BB84 protocol, and the interesting insight that actually quantum communications technology like BB84 was actually present. That was invented before we figured out what quantum computers were useful for, with Peter Shor and so on in 1994. So that's an interesting quirk, right? So in some sense, the quantum solution to the problem existed really before the problem itself became sharp. So it's possible to think about security in a different way. I'm going to show a quick slide if I can on this topic, right? But essentially, the most durable and the most kind of secure types of encryption are what we call symmetric. So they're based on a shared secret key, which you use for both the encryption and the decryption of data. And I think Sam touched on this when he mentioned that when we use something like the factoring-based schemes, we often use them to encapsulate and transmit a key, and then we use the key for the symmetric scheme, right? So the encryption is accomplished with the same key as the decryption, and the security of the system really rests on the security of the key, meaning that the key should be private and known only to the two authorized parties, right? The sender and the receiver. Cryptographers will call these people Alice and Bob. So QKD is a protocol which traces its history back to the first algorithm published in 1984 by Bennett and Brassard. And in this system, we accomplish just this sharing of the secret key. So it's just the key distribution that's accomplished. And we do this by transmitting quantum particles. So if I skip ahead to another very general slide here, the concept is to try and have security or secure key exchange, which then leads to secure communications, where the security of the system is not based on assumptions about the difficulty of some computation and the assumed capabilities of our attacker, but is instead based on something completely different, in this case, the laws of physics. So if you're able to transmit single particles, in this case, they would be particles of light, photons, you can transmit them between different sites. We know these particles have to obey the laws of physics, specifically the laws of quantum mechanics. And one of the laws which people may be familiar with, because it's entered into kind of popular culture, is this idea that the act of observing something changes it. This is a very profound insight from quantum mechanics. But what it means is if anyone tries to intercept or measure one of these particles as it travels, they will change it inevitably, right? And this allows us to construct a key distribution protocol in which these changes to the particle, which will be evidence of somebody trying to eavesdrop or tamper with the system, will be, they will drive some signal. In this case, they increase the error rate in the keys that are being generated. So in this situation, you might imagine one particle of light results in one bit, like a 0 or a 1, and the two parties should hopefully, in a case without eavesdroppers, end up sharing the same key. But the action of an eavesdropper will cause some of these bits to flip. These errors will be detectable. You can just compare some subset of the measurements at the end of the round. And if the errors are above some threshold, then you can't guarantee security. And if it's below some threshold, then the reverse is true. You can guarantee some security, and you can post-process this data to produce an encryption key. So this is quite an interesting solution. It allows us, I think, to move beyond security that's based on the assumed hardness of some mathematical problem into some different territory where we have this physics-backed security, physics-based security. So I think the pitch here, the elevator pitch for QKD as a technology, and there are many different protocols that fall into this realm. We can circle back to that later. But if we have the opportunity today to deploy these QKD systems, we can use them to harden communication networks. These are networks that will be already based on algorithmic encryption, so those will be present as well. This is an additional layer of guarantees. And this helps us to achieve something which the security ecosystem will call defense in depth. And I think also, since we're talking about maybe a finance community here, it also allows us to diversify our security guarantees. So hopefully, if we can accomplish this, if we can migrate not just to PQC, but also to build some QKD into the system as well, we will end up producing a more durable infrastructure that can support our, the ever-expanding digital economy into what I hope are some very exciting years ahead. So I hope that answered the question there, Audrey, and back to you.
Yeah, it absolutely did. Thanks for that, James. Awesome. So that's, for everyone on the call, that's the foundation, what quantum computing and tech is, the risk it creates, and kind of the security it can provide. So now what I'm going to do is we're getting to the fireside, the chat bit of it. I'm going to actually toss it into the very capable hands of James, Sam, and Anand to cover a few topics. And I know, we've got about a half an hour and we can kind of continue on, but to cover a few topics here. So I'll lay them out and then I'm just going to toss over. So we're going to talk about how real the actual threat is, and what that means on the ground here in the UAE. So we're going to start, Anand, I'll put you in the hot spot, kind of with a question that everyone in this space eventually asks. How close are we really to kind of a quantum computer that can break today's encryption? Is this threat realistic? Is it still theoretical? Give us thoughts. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Audrey, and thanks, Sam and James. Look, to the audience, right? 30 seconds on what we have covered till now, right? Okay. Quantum computing is different fundamentally, right? It is going to pose a very real threat to whatever cryptographic logic algorithms protect your data, right? It is no longer theory, right? It's getting practical. But now, the question that you asked, Audrey, right? How realistic it is, right? Which means for those of you who are planning to go to Sharaf DG or Jumbo Electronics and say, can I buy a quantum computer, right? Okay. the simple answer is no, right? We're not at that stage yet, okay? Now, if I look at, and Dr. James, I would definitely invite you into this conversation, because Dr. James actually has built quantum computers, and I think the audience who asked the most questions, or probably the most intelligent questions, given it's Dr. James, would be probably given a guided tour of the quantum computers that he has built. But before I hand it over to Dr. James, what I want to say is that from a layman's perspective, right, how do I access quantum computing, right? Okay. Now, for those of you who want to do this, there are several platforms available. There are cloud platforms from IBM, for example, Microsoft Azure Quantum, for example, D-Wave, for example. Now, all of this, they have quantum simulators in the background, right? And if you want to go and write quantum computing code or quantum algorithms and play around, in your little sandboxes, please go ahead. But what we are worried about is not this. What we are worried about is what we call as cryptographically relevant quantum computers, which means quantum computers which can actually break, right? Okay, those big numbers that Sam showed on the screen. Before I hand over to Dr. James, I would assume from whatever I have read that we probably are still maybe 10, 15 years away from that. But I guess, Dr. James, since you have built one, you would probably know more about this than I do.
Thanks, Anand. Yeah. So I think first of all, I have to disappoint you. I've not personally built a quantum computer, but some of my friends have. Right? So I live in a lab next door to some guys that are building quantum computers, and I've had the privileged position of a front row seat to this development for some years now. I would say yes, you're right. Mostly, I would say. So we're at the stage now where quantum computers definitely exist, and as you mentioned, you can access a number of these machines on the cloud, which is an interesting signal, right? This means people have been able to not only build these machines and test their work to the level where they can publish an academic paper, but they can also run them continuously in a way that you can actually use to provide cloud access to people who even pay for the cloud access, which I think in my mind, this implies a level of uptime guarantee, which is quite exciting. But as you say, they're small. So I think, first of all, to clarify one point, when we say that they're small or they're not yet large enough to be cryptographically relevant, it is the same platform. So they are running the same compute model, the same universal gate model that will eventually be able to run Shor's algorithm. And you can indeed run Shor's algorithm on these systems, just only for relatively small integers, like Sam's example of 15. So the machines exist, the capability is demonstrated and proven, right? The question is more of a capacity question, like when will the computers reach a large enough scale to threaten cryptography? And I suppose the good news here is that we are some way away from that. Shor's algorithm, the resource estimates for running Shor's algorithm to break, for example, RSA 2048 or something, these estimates indicate a very large machine. By comparison, if you wanted to break, if you wanted to do some interesting work in battery chemistry, or if you wanted to design fertilizer catalysts and these other kind of very economically meaningful activities, you would accomplish that with a machine like 2 orders of magnitude smaller than what you would need to break RSA. So that's some good news, I guess. This is really the very final hurdle that quantum computers will surpass. But the bad news is that they are coming, right? We have quantum computers here in Abu Dhabi today. So TII has a quantum computing lab that's producing QPUs, the quantum chips, in-house. And I think probably about a kilometer from me in this direction, there are somewhere between 3 and 5 quantum computers, depending on the day of the week. So the activity is progressing and we're coming along. I'm not sure. I mean, people always want to know when the machine is coming, when is it going to be available, when. And I think what I hear from that is they're kind of asking, how long can I procrastinate for until this becomes a big problem? I would say expert consensus. So that there's been a lot of interesting progress in the last couple of years. Like last year was really the year of quantum error correction. So people finally showed that you could combine noisy qubits, remembering qubits are the building block of a quantum computer. So you can now, it's proven now that you can, as an experimentally proven, you can combine several noisy qubits to produce a single less noisy logical qubit, right? So we passed that milestone experimentally sometime last year, and I think most major quantum computing efforts have now also passed that milestone. So it's replicated across modalities, across companies, across research efforts internationally. And I think at the same time, we see the resource estimates for running Shor's algorithm are sharpening year on year, and it's only trending down. So as people learn more about error correction, as people learn more about the efficient utilization of quantum resources, the costs of Shor's algorithm get less and less and less. And this is at some point going to meet the engineering efforts that are scaling up the machines. And so actually all of this is to say that trying to predict when this will happen is very hard, because it critically depends on the slopes of 2 graphs that are converging and moving at different rates and with nonlinear progress, right? So, but I would say 10 to 15 years is an optimistic take. I think the expert consensus now is
probably looks like, yeah. No, you're right, Dr. James, and you made a very pertinent point. Looking at this as a reason to procrastinate, right? Okay, and I guess that's probably the biggest risk, that it's an eventuality, right? Okay, it's just a matter of time, and that's why probably I want to maybe get Sam into the conversation. Given Sam, your focus is on post-quantum cryptography, and you mentioned the harvest-now-decrypt-later concept, right? Okay, and let's hear more about what this means, and how exactly it's important for banks and governments and others, who have confidential information with long horizons, right? Don't wait for the quantum computers to come, because as you rightly said, someone can just take your data today and keep it for later. So Sam, give us your perspective.
Yes. So I'll just quickly add on that as well. Two things. Number one, I think it's really hard for people to estimate correctly exponential growth. Like I remember that around 10 years ago, maybe AI was also this very niche kind of thing that nobody really had access to. And then before we know it, it explodes and it's everywhere. I'm not saying quantum computers are going to follow the exact same thing. You're not going to get a quantum iPhone, but it will, like, the access to it will significantly increase. And also people underestimate how much money there is on it. I actually watched earlier today about like a black market on the dark web that was selling people's credit cards that were stolen. Imagine how much more credit cards people can steal if they have access to a quantum computer. They don't necessarily need a quantum computer in their basement for that. They can literally hire an organization. This can be a whole new section of the black market where large organizations can essentially rent their quantum decryption service, quantum decryption as a service of sort, to people who are interested in stealing specific data. So it's going to be a lot of cross-collaboration, ugly cross-collaboration, to steal as much data as possible. So don't think that you're going to be safe, like necessarily that, like, not going to be my data, etc. And another thing I will touch on, which I will do it as part of my tangent to the next point. Thankfully, it's not like we are not doing anything about it. We have actually like the organizations, governments, and more around the world are already starting to work on remediating this problem with what's called post-quantum cryptography. Post-quantum in after quantum, so like cryptography that can withstand quantum computers, at least as far as we know. In 2024, NIST, the US government agency for cybersecurity, has standardized 3 algorithms called MLChem, MLDSA, and SLHDSA, which essentially, unlike RSA and elliptic curves, they utilize a fundamentally different type of math under them. Remember when I said cryptography is essentially a math that is easy to get the answer if you already have the question, but it's hard to get the question if you have only the answer. They utilize a different type of math that is, easy to answer if you have the question, but not vice versa. There are various type of tools. Now the thing is, and one question that comes up is we actually have dozens of post-quantum cryptographic algorithmic candidates coming in the upcoming years. Like, we got 3 now here. Why not just take those and be happy? Okay. The answer is we need to adopt what's called cryptographic agility. What does that mean? Only, as I mentioned, those algorithms were standardized in 2024. That's 2 years ago. That's great, actually. Around 2 years and 2 days now. That is very, very young, in terms of cryptographic test of time, compared to the last algorithms, which had decades of, we know they're not breakable at this point, basically, because there have been decades where they haven't been broken. Those new algorithms are new. We don't know yet what will happen. They have been now. Don't mistake it as to think they're not secure. It's just that, it's kind of like, think of like brain surgery, right? You take a lot of safety precautions, even if, you know that the operation is done by competent people and everything is very secure and highly, you'd still take as many precautions as you want, as you can, while you still don't know what's exactly the full outcome going to be. So so far, those new post-quantum algorithms seem to be withholding strong. They're not even close to being broken as far as we know, and they're not breakable by quantum computers. However, there is another technology you may have heard of, artificial intelligence, that is currently developing. It is something that's available now. And of course, good old classical computer mathematical breakthroughs. Actually, recently, as recent as July, I believe it was Anthropic, they were able to break a candidate of a post-quantum cryptography. So important to emphasize, it was not even close to one of those three algorithms. None of those are close to being broken. However, one of the candidates that was currently in the competition, essentially lost the competition because AI was able to accelerate an attack on it that was somewhat known already, but we thought that it would be quicker. Well, and even more so, it didn't exactly break it. It just made it that they would need to double the key size of the algorithm, which makes it a lot slower.
Sam, just as a layman, right? Okay, so we gave all the bad news that no, it's going to break all cryptography, and you gave the good news, right? The solution is already there, right? It's nice to hear that. And then you give the bad news that no, the solutions might again, not be there forever, which I think it's very logical, right? Because the technology is improving, the algorithms are improving. Now,
well, this isn't to say that cryptography is broken, like per se. This is not something that is new, actually. This is not the first time we have to do a cryptographic migration. This is the first time where it requires that amount of attention. And that's where we actually get a chance to change our mentality when it comes to cryptography. Cryptography used to be this kind of thing in the background that you kind of just put away and hope it will stay. This is actually our awakening moment of paying the proper attention to cryptography and making sure it stays that we can actually migrate it over and over as many times as we need, because we already had to do it. For example, RSA 1024 has been deprecated, I believe, either 2013 or 2014. But it was migrated to RSA 2048, which was easier. Now it's just a matter of the migration is a bit harder this time. It's important that this time we do it in the right way so that we can be resilient for the foreseeable future in the face of AI and quantum computers. So I was just trying to emphasize the point that this is definitely not something you can just do one time.
Makes sense, Sam, and I think what a lot of us as practitioners, right? Okay, want to understand is that what do we do now? What does the journey look like? For example, right, the whole post-quantum cryptography. So if you can maybe quickly explain,
Yes.
Given that I guess people are adequately alarmed now, with whatever we have said, right, and they're woken up, right? So what exactly do they need to do?
Yep, I will probably, if we get further talks, I will probably share also the cool stuff about post-quantum cryptography. So it's not all doom and gloom and all the scary stuff. Post-quantum cryptography actually provides us a lot of opportunities that we didn't have beforehand, especially with the diversity of algorithms that we are getting, as well as, the use cases, and of course, new technologies like quantum key distribution that James touched on. Now, just to touch on the migration journey, as I mentioned, it's important to do it the right way. It is a high stakes migration. So it's important to start it correctly. What you need to start with is what's called cryptographic discovery. As I mentioned, until now, cryptography was something that's in the background, not really looked at. You kind of just set it and forget it. This is changing. You now actually need to look at the cryptography that's in your estate, including ones that is used by third parties. Like, for example, your cloud service, KMS, or your third-party certificate. After that, you need to assess what you found and triage because at the end of the day, not all cryptography is under threat. And importantly, not all cryptography is the same. For example, your blog posts are probably not as important to secure, or even your JAR tokens, for example, your session tokens are not as important to secure as your long-lived data. You don't have to boil the ocean. You can start slowly, which is where the planning, prioritizing, and sequencing comes into play. You can do it as a multi-step program, securing the most important things first, the long-lived data first, and then step by step, propagating it across your infrastructure. Of course, after you plan, after you discovered, assessed, and plans, and did it across multiple departments, you start the migration process where you deploy the quantum safe algorithms. And as back to what I mentioned, cryptographic agility, you would be monitoring the migrated assets and basically keeping up with the news, ensuring that the algorithms are secure, and that if you need to migrate them again, you can restart the journey quickly. And thankfully, there are a lot of tools out there. There are a lot of people out there, brilliant people, like my companions here, who are trying to make it as easy and as automated as possible. And there are a lot of strides being made in this whole methodology.
Sure. Thanks, Sam. Thanks. I just want to take a slightly, a segue here, right, into very good, right? Makes sense. But where are the regulations, right? Because I guess the question that everyone's asking is that who is asking us to do all this, right? Yeah, we understand it, but then let's wait for the regulations. Let's wait for a guidance, right? So I just want to maybe do a segue into what's the landscape, right? Okay, in the UAE, and Dr. James, I'll invite you, to talk more about, because obviously you're playing your organization is playing a leading role in this, right? Okay, and let me first start off very quickly with some of the global direction, right? Okay, look, the global direction is very clear, and the direction is that please start migrating, right? Or please at least start planning to migrate, right? Okay. I think Sam already mentioned the NIST standards, the FIPS, right? Okay, and I know for a fact that if I look at UK, for example, they've already published timelines. I think it's 2028, right? Okay, for discovery, and 2021 for migrating all high priority items, right? And for Europe, it's something similar. I think it's around 2026 to do the discovery, high risk cases by 2030, I guess, and full migration by 2035. So when they say migration, what I'm talking about is that migrating all your high risk, vulnerable, existing cryptography to the robust standards that Sam mentioned, right? The solutions which have already been found, correct? Okay. Now let's come to UAE. UAE, as in most cases, right, is definitely not a laggard in this field, right? Okay. I'm not sure how many of you knew that there's actually quantum computers in the UAE. We have TII playing a leading role in that. But yeah, that's what this country is about, right? We have been at the forefront of technological development, and the whole fulcrum of initiatives and guidelines around this is under a couple of agencies, right? So we have the National Encryption Policy, which is kind of the nodal guideline, right? And there is a definite focus of the policy to push governmental agencies to start migrating. The UAE Cyber Security Council is kind of playing the leading role from a private sector perspective, in terms of laying out the guidelines, and in terms of trying to push the migration initiatives. I would probably understand from Dr. James, because in the UAE, this whole quantum initiative is led by TII, right? Okay, and then the Quantum Research Center, which is there, and under the whole umbrella of ATRC, right? So, Dr. James, just want to hear a bit more about what is TII doing. I know you gave a brief, right? But tell us a bit more about what is TII doing in this whole space, and how do people, access more of what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Anand. I would say, yeah. So when it comes to the quantum quantum activities in the UAE. TII is indeed playing a major role in this. In terms of leadership, you already mentioned the National Cyber Security Council. So the Cyber Security Council are leading on the response to quantum, let's say, the post-quantum migration, and also now championing our QKD push as well. And they're also interested in broader quantum technologies. So we have them as strong supporters in this space as well. So at the Quantum Research Center, we're working on a domestic quantum computing effort, which is based on superconducting transmons. I encourage anyone to visit our website and check out the information there, or just reach out to us directly for how that's going, right? We do now also have a cloud access activity, which is in development at the moment, with the intention of making UAE quantum computers available to initially the academic sector here in the UAE, because of course the local universities are pushing quantum education, which is a very important component of the overall landscape. When it comes to the cryptography, when it comes to the cybersecurity, we have a number of research centers inside TII, which will touch on this in different ways. But I would say the PQC work is being largely driven by our cryptography research center. And they have a venture as well. So there's a company called Quantum Gate who are active in this field. And from what I understand, it's very much as Sam presented it just now. So I think the industry consensus on this is really that the most important opening stage is some kind of discovery, some kind of inventory. You have to know what you have before you figure out how to protect it. And then constructing a sensible plan, like a proportional plan, a phased plan, and a prioritized plan to respond to that. And I think in that, on the Quantum Center, we propose this QKD technology. We have an entanglement-based QKD solution, which is sort of optimized for metropolitan networks and has some interesting features which we think will help to make it more palatable and easier to deploy, let's say. When it comes to the QKD stuff, we have been running an interesting activity with the UAE, inside the UAE, with our partners at the Abu Dhabi Global Markets, ADGM. Also, we have in the same activity, we have Hub 71, ADGM Academy, and my colleagues in a sister entity called Aspire inside ATRC. They're related to program management industry liaison. And what we did there is we built a multi-node, a 3-node QKD network inside ADGM's properties on Al Maria Island. And the intention here was to create a live sandbox in which entities initially within ADGM or the Hub 71 ecosystem, but actually anyone in the UAE really, could come and propose a use case and then test it out on a live network and see how it went. So we think this kind of activity is important for promoting the technology, for giving people access to it, to some extent demystifying it and showing how it works, right? But I think this is the quantum initiatives that are going on alongside the cryptographic work as well.
Sure. I was very surprised, that the Dubai Electronic Security Center last year has published Quantum Cybersecurity Readiness Guideline, right? Which very clearly talks about 3 steps. One is assess the quantum risk and the cryptographic dependencies, build the transition roadmaps, right? And then the implementation plan and the governance around it. So it's happening. It's already happening all around us, right? Now, for those of you who are from the financial services sector, the question that I get asked is that, what does central bank stand on this, right? Okay, and again, caveat, it's limited to what I'm aware of. I'm sure central bank does a lot of stuff that I'm not aware of, right? Okay, but Central Bank of UAE as of now hasn't published a formal standalone guideline on PQC, right? Okay, but the implicit assumption is that the requirements of PQC already are subsumed in existing requirements on cybersecurity, right? Okay, cloud, tokens. So the expectation is that go by what the Cybersecurity Council's guidelines are, because it's a national initiative, right? Okay, so don't wait for anything standalone to come from CBOE before you start your activities, right? Okay. Now, my next question is that having heard all of this, right, and I hope we have been able to communicate to everyone the fact that the threat is real, it's coming, right? What do banks, what do governments, right? Okay, what does a 12-month plan look like, right? Okay, and where do we as practitioners see organizations in the UAE, right? As of now, I'll probably start because I do talk to a lot of organizations, and this topic comes up. The way I would probably put it is that the awareness is building up, right? Okay, there are some who are more aware than the others, right? Okay, But the difference I see is that maybe 2 years back, AI was never part of board level discussions, right? 3 years back, climate and ESG was never part of senior management executive committee discussions, right? What I don't see is the quantum threat being part of those board level conversations. So I guess, while the awareness is building up at the more operational levels, I think what needs to happen is for this conversation to get elevated, right, at a more strategic level, and this also needs a build-up of awareness, right, and make it not just an initiative for the cybersecurity team, probably, but a more cross organizational initiative, because it involves vendor management, it involves business, it involves everyone, right? So, Sam, given that you are closest to this area in terms of the actual migration, right? And I know you have solutions to support clients on this. How would a 12-month roadmap look like?
Yeah, very good question. Because it's one thing to say start doing it or start talking about it. It's another thing on how to actually do it across the months. What I would say the first most important step is kind of like what you said yourself, kind of change the mentality on what this problem is. It is not just a simple tech upgrade, because as you mentioned, it's across different, it affects how you communicate with your vendors. It affects what type of technology you buy, everything. So essentially just kind of adopt that mentality across the culture. And then comes to getting a rough picture of what your estate looks like, because the post-quantum migration looks extremely different from company to company. For example, one company could be completely on the cloud, and they have and they have maybe a few hundreds, maybe a few dozens of vendors, etc. Something a bit smaller, while other companies are still completely on-premise or just doing a cloud migration, started recently, like in our case. It's also a question of how many of those systems are air-gapped, how many are in-house versus by vendors. Just get a clear picture, kind of a rough picture of that, to kind of estimate the complexity of the migration, like how difficult, more like how long is this going to be? Because frankly, it doesn't have to be difficult if it is well planned out. You need to get to be realistic. After you've done all that, you need to think on how would you actually start scanning said assets. So there is no way to do it really manually. For example, in our case, we found a single virtual machine was counted as a single asset manually. Makes sense. We scan that VM, we find 155 certificates. That means it's at least 156 assets, if I'm not wrong. So there is no way to do it manually. You're going to have to do it automatically. It doesn't necessarily have in an automated, using automated tool. There are a few automated tools out there, even open source ones. There are multiple other options you can use, depending on what you're looking at, depending on what you need and how complex the migration is going to be. And you need to orchestrate all those scans into a bigger picture. After you get that bigger picture, you actually start planning on how you start triaging said bigger picture. What do I need to migrate now? What can wait until later? And for that, you kind of use a matrix of how long the data needs to stay secure and how sensitive the data is. For now, just focus on the long-lived sensitive data. The others can wait for probably a few more years, and then start migrating that data. There is no real way to get it all, to finish the full migration in 1 year. That's why, for a lot of companies at least, that's why you need to focus on the right data. So you get, as I mentioned, you first get a rough picture, then you get a clear picture, and then you migrate the important things.
And Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of where crypto agility comes in as well. So it's not, we talked a little bit about how to, what to do in the first 12 months, but really, and Anand, it's a great question because we get that a lot, but, even focusing on the first 90 days so that stakeholder buy-in is incredibly important, how to present this to your board in a non-technical way. People like me can kind of understand, what does this mean our data? What is that risk that you so eloquently kind of talked about from a technical standpoint earlier in the webinar? What does this risk mean to our clients, to our business, to the bottom line? What's the business case? And then that really looking at kind of from a 30,000 foot view, that first 90 days, which is that quantum readiness assessment, like that, you can't, it's like taking a bite, eating the apple one bite at a time, but you've got your discovery phase first. And then this is something, again, that, when you post discovery, when you go into migration and mediation or remediation, it can go from 12 months, it's an ongoing process, like most cybersecurity programs are.
No, you're right.
And
you're right. And I guess that is probably the challenge, and that's probably the role that we, as consultants have to play, because we act as the interface between the highly technical, very smart people like James and Sam to a board, right? Okay, to whom we have to explain in business specific language what this threat actually means, right? Okay, and the way we look at it is that it's very simple, right? Okay, it's a reputational issue, right? If I take banks, for example, there is so much of long-lived data on clients, on financial transactions, for example, and all of this is at risk, right? If you don't migrate. So I guess that needs to be communicated. And I guess as Sam said, right, taking an inventory of your cryptographic assets, and this can be very complex because they could be hidden anywhere, right? Okay, in legacy systems, for example, right? And I guess taking that inventory and then looking at what data is most at risk from harvest-now-decrypt-later, I think that's probably the way I would look at it as a practitioner, right? Would be the first 90 days priority. But yes, starting with awareness, because I can hazard a guess here that the awareness of the risk is probably very limited right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, this has been such an informative hour, and you guys made my job as moderator incredibly easy. So thank you for that. Very humbled by all of the knowledge that you guys have, and there's so much to learn in this space. What I'd like to just do very quickly, I know we are over time, is just close with a quick kind of 30 seconds from each of you guys, just as a wrap up on kind of where do you see us going next, what to do next, what's your kind of tidbit of information in 30 seconds, and then we'll let everyone go. So Anand, I'll start with, actually, Sam, I'll start with you, then James, then Anand.
Yep. Wow, very nice. So I would say, first 10 seconds, do not panic. This is not the first time it's happening. To some degree, maybe it's the first time on the scale, but not the first time something like this happens. Do it correctly. Do it intelligently. Plan it out correctly. And then I would dare say, look at the opportunities that come across it. Different algorithms can be used for different use cases. A whole new kind of emerging technologies that comes with both risks and opportunities. Let's just mitigate the risks and maximize opportunities.
Awesome, thank you, James.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I agree with Sam. First of all, don't panic. It's a solvable problem, let's say. But yeah, also I would say you have to get started, right? So I think inactivity and this kind of somebody coined this term crypto procrastination the other day. I forget who it was now, but it went right across LinkedIn immediately as this kind of new buzzword, right? But that's the biggest threat, I think, is just sitting around doing nothing. So I think it's important to get started, like just make a start on this. And then also, I again, to repeat, Sam, but like there are some opportunities here. So again, the technologies that are being developed today have capabilities that weren't present before. So for example, with QKD, the stuff we've been working on, you have the opportunity for diversification, and you can create a really durable and really robust ecosystem in this sort of secure communication space, which we just couldn't do before. I think that would be a really nice outcome from all of this.
Brilliant, thank you, James. Anand.
Look, the way I look at it is that, is the risk real? Yes, it is. I hope we have been able to communicate that to everyone, in as a layman's language as we could, number one. Number two, is it immediate? Maybe not, but is it coming? It is definitely coming, right? For those of you who are regulation procrastinators, let's wait for the regulation, right? We already have the guidelines, right? Okay, there is no reason not to start acting, right? Okay. Do we have the solutions? Yes, we have the solutions. Sam has mentioned that the solutions are already there, right? So what's missing? I guess what's missing is the awareness, the acceptance that this is a serious topic, and also the acceptance that the window that we have before we actually start having those computers powerful enough to break those algorithms, that is an opportunity window for everyone to start the migration before it becomes a panic migration. So let's use this time well.
Yep. Well said, and well summarized, the three of you. I know, again, over time, so I wanted to thank everyone that has been on the fireside chat listening in. Stay tuned into your emails, please. We'll be sending out a link to the webinar as well as answering some of the questions that have come in throughout the hour. We'll be sending out answers to those as well. As always, thank you again to our speakers, Sam, James, and Anand. Fantastic information, and really look forward to having you guys back on as we have kind of a second session on this fireside chat. We've already had some requests come through for it. So thank you all very much, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you
very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.